We are continuing on our series, and I'm calling it a series because you all are helping us with it. This is part 5 of Miracles of Jesus. We're walking through the miracles of Jesus in chronological order, and Marlon and I are going to work on this together. So I'm going to do a couple, and then Marlon will do a couple. We hope that we will get you guys involved as well. This is meant to have you guys give us some thoughts of what we're reading and sharing. And if you hear me repeating it back, it's because we're on the microphone, so it's just that's why I'm repeating it back. So we're going to start out with Matthew 9. So if you head over to Matthew 9, this is a short one. This is 32. And let's set ourselves up. Where have we been? So right before this, we see the story of Jesus healing 2 blind men. This is right before this. This is also in that same area where we see the ruler's daughter, Jairus' daughter, being raised from the dead. We also saw the woman who touched his robe, who was having the blood issue. This is all in that same time frame. So even though it's broken up, this is the mentality. So he's trying to, walk through this town, and he's doing all this healing, and he heals 2 blind men right before this, and then immediately, it tells us in 31, but they went out and spread the news about him all over the region. So 32, while they were going out, a man who was demon-possessed and could not talk was brought to Jesus. And when the demon was driven out, the man who had been mute spoke. The crowd was amazed and said, "Nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel." But the Pharisees said, "It is by the prince of demons that he drives out demons." This is a very short one, but this is all in context. All these amazing miracles have happened right up to this. And as these blind men who now can see go out, another man is coming in who can't speak. And it actually says here, who was demon-possessed and could not talk. And yet the Pharisees here, right, 34, say it's by the prince of demons that he is driving out demons. And we'll spend a little bit in that, but before I get too far into that, what do you see here about how Jesus is operating? What do we learn about him? What do we learn, most importantly, about who he is as our Savior? Anybody have any thoughts? Or what stands out to you about this story? Yes. See, that's why he came, yes. Yes. He is there to provide the help. This is the mission that he's on. He's told them this is what my mission is. Marlon. Yes. It is very interesting that they're accusing him of this. It's an evil spirit that's brought to him, and yet they're trying to tell him he's casting this evil spirit out by the other evil spirits, basically, is what they're saying. Yes. Yes. Nikki. Fulfilling prophecy. It's right here, yes. The blind would see, the mute would talk, all of those things. The deaf will hear. Reminds you of a song, too, because it came out of the Bible. The dead will live again. We see that actually all right here. That's a good point, Nikki. All right in the same section, we are seeing those key things that he's read out of that scroll. I'm here to free people. Here's the things that's going to happen. And here's just another example of that. And I think what you all brought out was great, right? This is what Jesus is here for. And it says, when they were going out, a man who was demon-possessed and could not talk was brought to him. And I think that's a key thing. If we slow down and look at this, this means that somebody else brought this man to Jesus, right? This man in this story did not come himself. He came because somebody brought him, but somebody else brought him. And I think that's really important. We see some of these stories. I tend to gloss over these details. Oh, yeah, he's arrived. But that means there's somebody else in this picture. We don't have a name or anything else. A family member, a friend, community member who's like, this man needs Jesus, and brings this man to Jesus. Absolutely. I love that. Yes, somebody that's praying. You can just get a sense. Yes, somebody is back there going, I want to help this person, my family member, my friend, so badly. And then here's Jesus, and they bring Jesus. And they get no credit for this other than it says he was brought. And this may be several people for all I know, but somebody believed in Jesus well enough to bring their friend, their family member. And I love that you brought that to prayer, Marlene, right? How much do we care about our friends and family members to bring them to Jesus? Somebody needs Jesus. And it tells us, too, right, that he couldn't talk. So he couldn't even articulate what he needed in that way, at least verbalize, right? He might have had other ways he would have potentially been communicating. And It says when the demon was driven out, it doesn't even tell us necessarily how Jesus does it, right? We see so many of these different stories where Jesus might touch somebody, he might say a word. He doesn't even give us that. It just says, and when it was driven out, the man who had been mute, he spoke. Doesn't tell us what he even spoke, right? But it's like instantaneous. Somebody brings him to Jesus. Jesus just cast out that demon. The man speaks, and the crowd is amazed. So right here, when we look at this section here, what do you see about the people that are following Jesus at this point? What do we see? I know I just said they're amazed, but what else do we see? They're amazed by the miracles that he's performing. They've never seen anything like this. This other thing tells us there's a crowd around him. That's the thing that we have been noticing as we were going. Some of these miracles we have just Jesus and disciples there. Other miracles we have crowds. I think it was last time we saw the two crowds collide with each other. He was coming from one place and another crowd's coming out. And there's people all around Jesus throughout this. And so when the people said that nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel, I mean, some of these people would have seen what Jesus is doing, and other people, maybe this is the first time they've seen him. They are just like, we have never seen this before. And yes, right, he hears about the physical, emotional, mental, all the stuff, all the health of the people, and that's a great point. Like, we're getting pieces of this, but these were all pointing back to who he is and to something greater. Again, that idea of freedom. He's pointing back to something greater. These physical healings and these miracles are pointing back to something. And I know I said this before, but over and over again, as we're seeing these miracles too, these miracles were great, but these people are no longer alive, right? He didn't keep them alive forever. What he was concerned about, right, is their spiritual health, so that, this is getting us further ahead, right, when he fulfills, which he did, fulfills his mission and comes again, these people will be alive again. Like, he was concerned about that spiritual health, right? Like, for the time being, we look at these, all these miracles are temporary. If you really look at it that way. These people eventually died, they're no longer with us, and yet their stories are with us, and he's pointing to something greater. Otherwise, why would we care about these now, right? It would just be facts that we would have. And yet, there's a reason why they're here. So to wrap up this section, Marlon already said this too, like the Pharisees, while the people, there's an opposite reaction, while the people are completely amazed, the Pharisees are like, nope, it is by the prince of demons that he drives out demons. So what's happening here in terms of spiritual blindness? What do you see that this tells us about spiritual blindness? Or spiritual sight, really? Yes? He's not fitting what they think at all. Did I hear somebody else? Yes?
I'm just saying it's all about self and self.
All about self. They want it to be promoted. Yes, exactly. Because everybody else is going, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Like, somebody who was demon-possessed, who could not talk, can talk, and they're not demon-possessed anymore. And yet, jealousy, pride comes in the way, and they go, well, this can't be for real. And yet the people who are there going, this is the most amazing thing we've ever seen. Yeah. The power dynamic, that's a really good point. And we're going to see as these miracles happen that it heats up for Jesus. It heats up for him. The water's getting hotter. He knows what he's about, right? And the opposition gets to be tougher. And we know elsewhere that Jesus responds to this and says, a house divided against itself can't stand, right? And so he's making a point like, how I'm not the devil, basically. That's what they're accusing him of. I'm not the devil. Why would I be throwing out my own people out of that? Like, that doesn't work. This is not how this works. So therefore I have to be the opposite. And yet they are so blind to that. And yet Jesus continues to work these miracles and continues on this path. And we're going to go over to John 5, and we're going to see a longer story here in John 5. And we're going to see some of these same themes come up again. So now we have Jesus, and it says, sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. So John 5, verse 1. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." And then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." And at once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. We dealt with the Sabbath thing at another point too. And so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" The man who had been healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who made him well. I just want to acknowledge that every time Jesus is like, let's keep it on the down low for a little bit, because he's got work to do, and the crowds keep getting bigger. They're going to impede him, right? And as soon as he tells the man doesn't know who it is at first because Jesus slips away. He's not going to tell him. As soon as he does, the man's like, "Oh, it was Jesus." Why? Not because he wants to get Jesus in trouble, but because these people are so excited. They're like, "It was Jesus." So what do you see in the story? There's a lot we can unpack, but what's the thing that stands out to you about who Jesus is as our Savior here? Yes. Yeah, there's this thought that if you get down to the pool, now imagine this guy can't walk, so that would be very hard for him to beat somebody else who was a little more mobile for whatever reason down into this pool. What I think is interesting too, talking about that spiritual blindness, right in front of him is actually Jesus, the one who's going to be performing the miracles, and he can't see that. Right? It says he doesn't even know who this is. And this is another one too. We were talking about this too, how people come to Jesus. Jesus comes to this man. This man doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know to come to him. But Jesus comes to the man, and is basically like, "Do you want to get well?" And the man's explaining the situation, and the life giver, the healer, is standing right in front of him. He goes, "Well, I need to get to that pool." Well, actually, you don't. Jesus proves that in a second. "I'm right here. I'm right in front of you." And there's something enough in there for that man to be like, "Oh." There's something different here. "Yeah, I do." And so Jesus tells him, "Pick up that mat and go." I mean, what kernel of faith, even though he probably felt hopeless, as we just pointed out, kernel of faith he had to have had to get up. He hasn't walked for 38 years. To think that somehow you could just get up and walk, but he could, because the one that could do it was right in front of him. Other thoughts on this one?
This is work. This is most work he's done in 38 years.
It's most work he's done getting up and moving around, yep. This would have been a big deal because they're seeing a person with a mat. Somebody's like, "Wait a minute, you're not supposed to be, according to our rules, you shouldn't be carrying this mat around. What's happening?" And once again, we see that they missed the entire point when the man's like, probably tells them like, "Hey, I was, lame. I'm sitting by this pool and this guy comes up." He doesn't know who it is, and here I am. And instead of being like, "Wow, that's amazing. Praise God, you're up walking," they're like, "Why are you carrying your mat?" Like, did we just miss something here, people? Like, yeah, we did miss something, clearly. And yet, this man's so enthusiastic that he calls it right back out and says, "It's Jesus." Yes. Yes, that's the key. It was their rules, and the one that created the Sabbath is actually right there among them. If anybody should know what Sabbath should be used for, it would be the one who created it. Yeah.
You haven't walked in 38 years. You've got a grin going from one ear to the other. I mean, you're smiling. You
Freedom,
are going
yeah.
to be lit up. Everybody that's seeing you is like, "What's wrong with that?"
Had to ignite that hope, yes. I love that. As I'm wrapping up this section and Marlon's going to be coming up, I think one of the things that I'm seeing over and over again is that God is using a variety of ways to reach people. Jesus is reaching people and can read our hearts. And over again, we see that. That's why we see so many different ways these miracles happen, because he knows, as you just said, sometimes he needs to ignite a flame. Sometimes he needs to question a little bit. Sometimes he needs to touch them. Sometimes he needs to just speak it out. But each time, the end result still is that God is glorified in what he's doing.
All right, we're headed back to Matthew 14. Matthew 14, we find a whole bunch of people on their way to Passover. they're walking along, but I mean, Jesus has been in operation for a while, and these people have heard of Jesus' reputation. I mean, he speaks with authority. He's teaching stuff that they never even thought of. He loves and he shows who God is in incredible ways. And I got to think, sitting at the feet of Jesus, the way Jesus tells the story and talks about the Father and what God wants from his people and what God is trying to give them and how he's trying to save them, that these stories make you extremely happy, extremely full of hope. So we're talking about the physical, but there's a spiritual thing that a lot of people had got into a routine. Yeah, they go up there and they do their little routines for the feast. This is how they do it, and they do it exactly the same way every single time. And it has got cold and almost just too routine for them. And they want to see Jesus because Jesus speaks with authority, which is incredible. And the way he preaches and talks, not to mention what we've been talking about, these miracles are incredible. And so people on their way to the feast are leaving a day or two early because they want to seek out who Jesus is. So there is a pretty big mass of people moving across the countryside, going to the feast, who are seeking Jesus, and they find him. And we see it here in Matthew 14, verse 13. And this is, by the way, this is right after John the Baptist has been beheaded. And it says Jesus took off for a little bit and went into the desert, a deserted place. Now, if you just lost your cousin, the prophet who was to come before you, who has been doing this amazing work, he consecrated his whole entire life for you. And you hear that he's been beheaded. It said when Jesus heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. But the multitude heard it, and they followed him on foot from the cities. And when Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion for them and healed their sick. So Jesus has had some alone time with his Father, and I don't know about anybody out there, but if you've lost friends, I have places I need to go for a while to think about it and contemplate when you lose friends. I think of a few of them that I have lost, and where I've gone and what I've done, and you spend some time thinking about some of the memories you had of that person, some of the special times you've had with them, and then you talk to God about the whole situation also, and you got to get your mind right with everything. And it's good to see Jesus' example here, but let's go on. This miracle gets a lot bigger than just this. The multitude, he's moved with compassion for them, and he heals their sick. So he starts off just healing. But when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is very late. Send the multitude away that they may go into the village and buy for themselves food." But Jesus said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "We have only 5 loaves and 2 fish." You always wondered, where did they get the little boy in this story? You hear the story quite often, and it's like, where did they get the kid? We just read this. It's in John. There's a little lad here who has a lunch. You know, mom knows he's going to go on the trip and made him a lunch. He's got 5 loaves and 2 small fishes. So this is where you've heard this before, but anyway. And they said to him, we have only the 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And he said, bring them here to me. Then he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looked up to heaven. He blessed and broke and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitude. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of fragments that remained. Those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So this is not just a small group. 500, I would think, would be a pretty big crowd to fit into maybe a valley or whatever. But this is 5,000. We're talking, the hillsides had to have been lined with people. There were a lot of people in this crowd. Any comments on Missy? Yeah, I mean, so the disciples haven't thought this through because of the miracles that have transpired. And that's how these people gathered in the first place. They're bringing them sick from everywhere. I mean, they're trying to bring all these people in already from all these surrounding villages and towns for this Passover. Even them, they're trying to bring in to see this. And they go by, and you imagine packing somebody who's maybe got a really bad leg or something and limping along, and they want to go to the Passover really bad, and you say, you know, on the way by, we ought to swing and see Jesus. I hear he's out there, out and about. You swing by and see Jesus. Now guess what? He's packing half the camp. He's healed. So he's healing the sick. He's feeding them physically. Yeah, and then he talks with them. He's got an air of a king. We know that Jesus wore no major robes or anything else like that. He was dressed like just a weary traveler. The only thing that would have drawn you to Jesus was the atmosphere around him. You know, he appears and he talks with a man of authority. And he talks of the love of God. Now, there is a lot of different kingdoms have tried to work on different principles. A lot of them have tried to keep their people out of fear. If you don't do it, off with your head. Jesus' kingdom is totally different. If you love me, keep my commandments. If you love me, serve me. Follow me. But only if you love me. You know, I ain't going to make you do this stuff. Come. And of course, in this case, Jesus can see that he has more time he wants to spend with them. I mean, he could have did what the disciples said, send them off into the countryside and let them go get their own food. But Jesus said, no, let me feed them. You know, let's feed them. And he took care of the situation. And what was brought out is that they, in turn, tried to make him king because of this. I mean, he can feed you, he can heal you. What kind of army could fight against that type of stuff? You don't have to pack it. You don't have to worry about getting beat up in a battle. Jesus can heal you. You know, but Jesus wasn't there for that. He's there for their spiritual as well. And that was so important to him because that was his whole entire purpose here. He wasn't here to set up a kingdom right now. He's telling them about a kingdom of heaven and what it's like and how good it'll be. The next one is also in 14 right after that, 14:22. Jesus is, he's dispensed to people. He told the disciples to go on ahead of him in the boat. He's going to go back across the lake again, but Jesus is going to take a different route. So immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he sent the multitude away. And when he had sent the multitude away, he went up into the mountains again by himself to pray. Now when the evening came, he was alone there. Was he alone there? You consider it. I do a lot of fishing and different things by myself. I try not to ever be alone. I might be the only person in the boat that you can see or that left the dock, but why would I waste that time? I have time to spend in prayer, time to spend with God, and it is a true blessing to be able to speak to God in prayer. If you don't go off into the desert or go off into the woods, but you shut off the television, shut off the radio, take time to spend with God. You'll find it to be a huge blessing. And Jesus is doing this again, of course. We know he's just lost John the Baptist. He just performed a miracle with 5,000 people there. He just fed and he healed. He's been busy with these all day long. He has compassion on the people. He's still got a whole year or so worth of work before him. He knows what his outcome will be on this earth. If you're in the mission field and you're trying to do the work of the Lord, you have got to be spiritually connected. If you are not slowing down to refresh, focus, and let God talk with you, you're losing. The amount of blessings would be just incredible. And Jesus knows this. He spends time with his Father in prayer. Now, but now he can see out onto the lake. Now out in the middle of the lake, the little boat's getting tossed back and forth by the waves, for the wind was contrary. So, if you've ever been in a kayak, canoe, or anything else that you're rowing, or even trying to sail, if you are trying to go against the wind, it isn't easy. That's a tough order to do. A lot of times you go forward a little bit and it seems like you don't go at all. And I can tell you when I go against the current of the wind, like yesterday, there was times when it almost felt like I was going backwards. And it sometimes you almost do. Now it was the fourth watch of the night. Jesus went to them walking on the sea. Has anybody heard that incredible idea that you can just take off and go walk across the water? Just going to go walk across only if it's frozen. Only if it's frozen. And if you had to walk across that lake even when it was frozen and you're dealing with the wind, it's not going to be easy. But Jesus is just out walking on the water. I don't know what that would look like. I've tried to picture that. Would you be up and down? Would you just be smooth? I'm not certain. But Jesus was doing it. I know that much. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a ghost." You got to think about it. If it's nasty and they can't see that far and they just see this person out walking on the water, I mean, what are you going to call it? You've never seen that before. I don't know. I've never seen a ghost, and I don't want to see a ghost. But they obviously have heard stories about ghosts because they call it a ghost. And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come out on the water." So he said, "Come." And when Peter had came down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. And when he saw that the wind was blusterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Now it's, why did you doubt? Because obviously he didn't doubt at first. He took the step. He went. He was on top of the water. He was walking until he started looking around and noticed that the waves were pretty big and the wind was blowing awful hard. And it's like, wow. And he took his eyes off of Jesus. He started to sink. "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat came and worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Faith of his disciples is what he's trying to teach. I like that. He's trying to seal up any of the little doubts that they might possibly have. I mean, at one point during the storm with him, and he says, "Be calm, be still," or whatever, and the water just flattens out immediately. And now he's walking on water. And they're just like, this has never been done before. These are fishermen. If you could walk on water, there'd be time when you go out there and straighten out your nets and get back in the boat. You know, there's things you could do if you could walk on water as a fisherman that you can't do if you're just stuck in a boat. But it is Peter who's always the first to jump in. And in this case, it's kind of interesting. First to step out of his comfort zone and start to walk. But then he stops thinking heavenly and starts thinking worldly. And the world has never been able to walk on water. And he lost his faith because we aren't supposed to be able to do that. That's a miracle that only God can perform. And Peter was no different than the rest of us. He couldn't walk on water if he tried to do it on his own. But by Jesus, and Jesus caught him. The miracle that's there is Jesus reaching down and pulling him up, putting him back into the boat. I find that incredible too.